1300 AS9. We found these parchments buried deep in the damp English soil. This is the tale of Alistair, a man who was a knight by rank, but a wolf by nature. A story of blood steel and a love that cost him everything. Listen to his voice.
If this parchment has not rotted in the humidity of the English earth, it means my words have finally found ears to hear them. My name was Alistair. To my father, I was merely a second son, which in our kingdom meant, you have the right to a surname, but not to a crumb of bread. All the property, the horses, and the favor of the lords belonged to my eldest brother. All that was left for me was the iron. The world I was born into does not smell of roses, as those SW-voiced troubadours sing. It smells of horse dung, rusty metal, and piss on the streets of London. Chivalry? That was a pretty fairy tale for the ladies, until we found ourselves in a field near Agincourt or in the swamps of Aquitaine. You think we were heroes in shining armor? Huh. Most of my life, I spent trying to wash the blood of other men's peasants off my boots and praying not to die of dysentery in a dirty tent. My knighting took place when I was 19. It was not a celebration. It was a cold morning when my lord, whose fingers were greasy from breakfast, struck me with the flat of his sword on my shoulder and said, "Now you are the King's steel, Alistair. Learn to kill so that I am not ashamed." That day, I felt the weight of the mail on my shoulders. 10,000 steel rings, each one pressing down on your soul, reminding you that your life is now worth less than the cost of your horse. I remember my first real battle. It was not a heroic clash, but a dirty emiad grinder. We stood in mud that reached our ankles. The visor of my helmet fogged up, and I saw the world through a narrow slit, like looking through the Keilol of hell. When the horses crashed into the ranks of the infantry, the sound was like thousands of dry branches snapping. That was human bones breaking. I killed a man whose name I did not even have time to ask. His eyes were filled not with hatred, but with simple astonishment, as my dagger found the gap under his armpit. I pulled the knife out, and warm blood splashed onto my gauntlet. In that moment I realized, there's no honor in a knight's golden spurs, if they are forged from the death of poor men. But in our world, there was no other way. If you are not a wolf, you are a sheep. I became a very good wolf. I won tournaments, throwing pompous lords off their horses, men whose bellies bulged from beneath their breastplates. I received purses of gold and dinners in castles, where the floor was strewn with fresh reeds to hide the stench of rotten food and dog shit. I saw injustice every day. Lords discussed taxes on grain, while their peasants ate the bark of trees just to live until spring. And I was part of this machine. I protected those who did not deserve protection, and killed those who simply wanted to live. By the time I was 30, I had become empty. My face was marked by a scar from an enemy arrow. It passed so close to my eye, leaving me a permanent reminder of how random death really is. Cynicism settled in my heart. I drank ale in taverns where women with low necklines and tired eyes offered a minute of warmth for a few copper coins. I took that warmth, but it did not heat me. It was like trying to start a fire with wet straw. I often thought about just riding into the forests of Sherwood and becoming an outlaw. At least they did not lie to themselves about honor. But I continued to wear my heraldry, a white lily on a blue background. What irony! A lily, the symbol of purity, on the armor of a man whose hands were dipped in the filth of this world every day. Do you know what the scariest thing about the Middle Ages is? Not the plague, not even the war. The scariest thing is the LNLNS in a crowd. You are surrounded by squires, pages, other knights. But you know that if tomorrow you fall from your horse and break your neck, they will simply strip the armor from your body to sell it at the nearest market and forget your name by nightfall. I was ready for such a death. I waited for it. I thought my life would end somewhere in a roadside ditch during yet another minor feud over the borders of some pasture. But the heavens decided differently. It sent me an encounter that was more terrible than any battle. For in battle, you know where the blow is coming from. But love strikes you in the back, when you finally take off your armor and become defenseless. It happened at the feast of St. George in the castle of the Earl of Sussex. I came there as a hired sword, to take part in the tournament and earn money for a new WRH horse, because my old faithful Sirius could hardly drag his legs anymore. The crowd was noisy, smelling of roast boar and cheap wine. I stood by the hitching post, wiping sweat from my face after another match, when I heard the rustle of silk. I turned around, expecting to see one of those bored ladies looking for diversion with rough warriors. But there she stood, Eleanor. Her eyes were not the color of the sky or the grass, no. They were the color of deep, dark amber, in which the sun itself was frozen. She was not smiling. She looked at me with such flagrant curiosity that for the first time in my life, I felt my steel plates had become too small for me. "They say you are the best sword in the kingdom, Sir Alistair," she said. Her voice was low and clear. It cut through the noisy crowd like a knife through butter. I looked at her, at her white skin that had never seen the burning sun of the fields, at her delicate hands, and I felt my own vulgarity. My nails were black with dirt. My skin smelled of stale sweat and horse. I was a dog of war, and she was a dream that does not exist. "They say many things, lady," I answered, trying not to sound too rough. But most of those words crumble into dust as soon as the real business begins. She slightly raised an eyebrow. In that moment, I did not yet know that this woman was the wife of a man who could execute me with one wave of his hand. I did not know that she was a bird in a golden cage, whose wings were broken in childhood. I just stood there, suffocating from the scent of her perfume, which smelled of jasmine and danger. 1300 AD-9 became the year of my greatest sin and my only salvation. I was the Knight Alistair, and I had just signed my own death warrant with a single glance. But gods, if I were offered to turn back time, I would take that step again. For it is better to burn in hell for one night with her, than to live for eternity in the cold gleam of empty steel. I never believed in fate. To me, it was a word weak men used to justify their failures. But when I saw Eleanor again at the main table during the evening banquet, I realized that my life, as I knew it, was over. She sat to the right of her husband, Lord Thomas de Clifford. Thomas was a man I hated before he even opened his mouth. He was 20 years her senior, a bloated man with a flushed face and eyes that were always looking for someone to humiliate. He held her hand as if she were his WRH horse or his favorite hunting falcon, a property he flaunted before others. I saw his greasy fingers, stained with sauce from roast swan, squeeze her slender wrist. She did not flinch. She just stared into nowhere, as if her soul had long ago left that body and was flying somewhere high above the spires of the castle. The whole evening I could not take my eyes off her. It was madness. Around me, hundreds of warriors drank ale, laughed at dirty jokes, and threw gnawed bones to the dogs fighting under the tables. The stench of unwashed bodies, sour wines, and cheap smoke from the torches filled the hall. But I saw only her. She was like a pure spring in the middle of a swamp. Once her eyes met mine. It lasted less than a second, a brief flash of AMBR in the semi-darkness, but it felt as if my skin had been flayed off. She knew everything. She saw my fire and answered it with her coldness, which was hotter than any flame. Our first meeting without witnesses happened 3 days later. The rain poured as if it wanted to drown all of England. I was on guard by the West Tower. It was part of my job that I hated. My armor became damp. The cold crept under my mail, and I dreamed only of a glass of strong wine by the fireplace. Suddenly, I heard a rustle. From the shadows, a figure emerged, wrapped in a dark cloak. I had already placed my hand on the hilt of my sword, but I stopped. It was her. Without the escort of pages, without her LUV-ish dress. She looked so small and fragile under this downpour. We stood under a stone canopy, and the sound of the rain beating the ground created a wall around us that no extra sound could penetrate. I did not know what to say. A knight who could oachoot the roar of battle now stood before a woman dumb, like a boy at his first confession. She came closer, so close that I smelled her hair, lavender and wet wool. It was the most intimate moment of my life, though we did not even touch each other. Eleanor told me about her life without a single word. I saw it in her posture. She was the daughter of an impoverished baron, whom her father sold to Thomas for 300 gold coins and the right to graze cattle on Clifford's lands. In our world, a woman was merely a coin with which men bought power. Thomas did not love her. He only loved the fact that he possessed such beauty. He punished her for every mistake, for every glance he deemed too free. I saw a bruise on her neck, which she tried to cover with the collar of her cloak. In that moment, I knew I could kill for her, and I realized I would do it, if need be. That night we only spoke. She whispered about how she hated this stone that they call a castle, about how she wanted to see the sea she had read about in books, and I told her about freedom, which I did not have either. We were two prisoners who had found a crack in the walls. After that night, my life turned into an endless wait for the darkness. We met wherever we could, in the old chapel behind the altar, where the smell of incense mixed with our passion, in the neglected garden, where nettles burned my legs, but I felt no pain, even in the corridors of the castle, where every shadow could be Lord Thomas's spy. It was life on a razor's edge. Every kiss of ours could be the last. Do you know what it's like to love when the executioner stands behind your backs? It sharpens all senses. Every touch of her hands to my chest, every sigh, all of it was filled with such sharpness that I had not felt even in the bloodiest battles. We made love desperately, with a kind of rage, as if trying to feed on an entire life that we would not have. I remember one time in the chapel. It was the middle of the night, a single candle burning down at the feet of a stone saint, who looked at us with his blind eyes. I was removing layers of expensive silk from her, unlaying her corset, and the Yegi of her clothing seemed to me a chain that I was breaking. When she finally stood before me completely naked, in the moonlight that filtrated through the stained glass, she seemed to me not a human, but a deity. I, a rough warrior with scars and hard hands, was afraid to touch her, lest I break her, but she herself pulled me close. Her skin was hot, like RHOT steel in a blacksmith's forge. We fell onto the cold slabs, and I felt my heart beating against her ribs, two rhythms that merged into one. In that minute, there was no Lord Thomas. There was no England. There was no sin. There was only us. But morning always returned us to hell. I had to put on my armor again and bow my head before her husband. I saw how he looked at her, how he placed his heavy hand on her shoulder, and I wanted to draw my sword and cut him from shoulder to groin. But I knew, if I did this, we would both perish in a minute. Eleanor taught me to endure. She taught me to be not only a wolf, but a fox. We developed a system of signs. A white handkerchief on the window of her room meant not today. A wild rose flower left by a page in the stable meant wait for me by the river. We bribed an old monk, Brother Lawrence, who for a glass of good wine and my promise to protect his garden from robbers allowed us to use his cell on the outskirts of the monastery. There, among the smell of dried herbs and old books, we spent entire hours simply holding hands. Eleanor was wiser than I. She knew that it could not last forever. "Alistair," she said to me one time, when we sat under a weeping willow by the moat, "Thomas is beginning to suspect something. His spy, Sir Gilbert, has seen you near the West Tower too often. He is no fool. He is just waiting for proof." I knew Gilbert. He was a like man who made his living by sniffing out other people's filth. I felt his gaze on my back, during training on the practice field. Every blow of my sword, every movement was under surveillance. My brother knights also began to joke that Sir Alistair prays in the chapel too often. In our world, jokes are the first heralds of the gallows. But we could not stop. It was like thirst in a desert. You know the water is poisoned, but you drink anyway, because the thirst is stronger than the fear of death. I became obsessed with her. When I did not see her for at least one day, I felt my brain begin to melt. I became irritable. I began seeking reasons for duels with other knights, simply to release that rage I had to hide before Thomas. The great tournament for the king's birthday was approaching. It was the place where Lord Thomas wanted to show his greatness. I was to be his main champion. He promised me a great reward for victory, but I knew that this tournament was a trap. Eleanor passed me a note through Brother Lawrence, and it was only one sentence, written in her steady, beautiful handwriting. They know everything. Do not come to the tournament. Flee. I read those words and felt cold sweat drip down my spine. Flee. A knight does not flee. A man who loves must make a choice. I could not leave her alone in Thomas's hands. I knew what he would do to her if I disappeared. He would destroy her slowly, day by day, reveling in her suffering. I decided to stay. I decided to go to this tournament and win it. I naively thought that if I became the hero of the whole kingdom, Thomas would not dare touch me or her. How wrong I was. I forgot that in F40 and Cnt England, the right of might is always higher than the right of honor, if that might belongs to the one who has a title and money. That last night before the tournament, we met by the river. It was so quiet I could hear the breath of the earth. We did not make love. We just stood, embracing, and watched the water flow. She wept silently, without a sound, and her tears burned my neck harder than RHOT charcoal. Promise me, she whispered, that if everything goes wrong, you will not let them take you alive. I kissed her on the forehead and remained silent. I could not make such a promise. For as long as she breathed, I had to live to protect her, even if for that I had to walk through hell itself. I returned to my tent at dawn. My squire, a boy named Tom, was already preparing my armor. The steel gleamed in the first sun, and I saw my reflection in it, a tired man with eyes that had seen too much. I put on the mail. I tightened the straps on the breastplate. I took my heavy helmet. I felt as if I were putting on my own coffin. Will we win today, Sir Alistair? Tom asked, looking at me with admiration. Today, Tom, we will simply try to survive, I answered. The crowd in the stands was already noisy. I saw Lord Thomas in his golden garb. He was laughing, talking to someone from the royal court, and beside him sat Eleanor. She was pale as a sheet, and her eyes were fixed on the entrance to the arena. She was looking for me, and she found me. I raised my lance and saluted her. It was an open challenge. It was a gesture that everyone who knew the truth understood. A whisper swept through the stands. Lord Thomas stopped laughing. His face became crimson, and he whispered something to Gilbert, who stood behind him. The tournament began. The sound of trumpets cut through the air, and I spurred my horse. In that moment, I did not know that in an hour I would be lying in a puddle of my own blood, accused of treason I did not commit, and of a sin that was my only truth. But even then, flying toward my enemy, I felt only one thing, the scent of jasmine, which still remained on my fingers. 3,950 words of our secret passion were merely a prelude to the horror that awaited us ahead. It was a time when the heavens turned away from us, and the earth prepared to receive our blood. But I was ready, for a night without love is just a piece of steel, and I finally became a man. The sound of the lance hitting the shield was like thunder that rent my sky forever. It was not a fair fight. As I charged at my opponent, that very Sir Gilbert, the snake in armor, I felt my horse tremble. That treacherous bastard had cut the girth of my saddle or greased my horse's hooves with fat. I do not know. But in the moment of impact, I flew not at my enemy, but down under the hooves. The world exploded in a flash of white pain. The mud of the arena filled my mouth. The taste of iron and horse sweat mixed with my own blood. I tried to rise, but the heavy boots of Lord Thomas were already on my chest. He did not wait for a trial of honor. He just stood over me, choking on his own rage, and I saw foam bubbling on his lips like a mad dog. "Traitor," he howled, and that cry was taken up by the crowd who only a minute ago were applauding me. They stripped me of my knightly belt. It was worse than death. In our world, a knight without a belt is a corpse that has been forgotten to be buried. They broke my sword over the stone of the scaffold, and the sound of that snap still reverberates in my head every night. I sought Eleanor with my eyes. I saw Gilbert and 2 guards dragging her from the stands. Her scream was the only sound I heard through the roar of the crowd. She stretched her hands toward me, and in that gesture there was more despair than in all the prayers of this world. I was thrown into the dungeon of Helmsley Castle. Do you know what a medieval prison is? It is not just a room with bars. It is a hole in the ground where the walls are always weeping with cold slime, and the air is so thick with the stench of excrement and rotting straw that you can chew it. Rats were my only companions. They ran over my body, tasting my wounds, and I did not even have the strength to drive them away. For the first 10 days, I did not know if it was day or night. The pain in my broken ribs became my new heartbeat, but physical pain was nothing compared to the pictures my mind drew. I saw Eleanor on the rack. I saw Thomas, that fat bastard, burning the mark of a harlot onto her white skin. I saw her hair, that very amber hair, being cut off and thrown into the fire. Those thoughts were sharper than any torture. I beat my head against the stone wall, hoping it would crack and free me from this imagination. But the stone was indifferent. On the 11th night, Gilbert came to my cell. He brought a torch, whose light burned my eyes, and a plate with rotten fish. He stood there clean, smelling of expensive perfume, and smiled with that same smile that makes you want to rip out your own guts. "She's dead, Alistair," he said calmly, as if he were telling me about the weather. "Lord Thomas does not tolerate treason. Her body was thrown into the river 3 days ago. The fish have already eaten her eyes." In that moment, my heart simply stopped. I did not scream. I had no strength for a scream. I just felt everything inside me turn to ash. It was the end. All my world, all my struggle, all those secret kisses in the chapel, all of it was washed away by dirty water. I lay on the wet straw and waited for death to come and take me. I stopped eating. I did not even drink that stinking water they brought me. I wanted to just disappear, to dissolve in this dark stone. 3 more days passed. I began seeing the shadows of dead friends. It seemed to me I was no longer a human, but just a heap of rotting meat waiting for its turn in hell. But on the 4th night, the door of my cell opened again. It was not Gilbert. It was old Brother Lawrence. He was trembling, and in his hands was a small basket of medicines. He approached me, placed his hand on my feverish forehead, and whispered words that brought me back from that other world. "She is alive, my son. Gilbert lied to break your spirit. She is imprisoned in the North Tower, but she is alive. She passed this to you." He unclenched my palm and placed a tiny, dried wild rose bud into it, the very same rose we had used as a sign. She smelled of it, even through the stench of the prison. I felt that faint, barely perceptible scent of jasmine and lavender. It was like a lightning strike. My blood, which had almost frozen, began to pulse again. She is alive. She is waiting. She is fighting. And I, Alistair de Mowbray, have no right to die in this hole while her heart is still beating. Hope. It is the most terrible and beautiful thing in the world. It hurts more than a whip because it forces you to feel again. Brother Lawrence told me that Thomas is preparing a public execution in 2 days. He wants to chop off my head before the whole city and send Eleanor to a strict convent where she will spend the rest of her days in silence and darkness. This was our last chance. I helped you not because I approve of your sin, whispered the old monk, washing my wounds with wine that burned mercilessly, but because God cannot want such cruelty. You have friends among the squires, Alistair. Your Tom. He has not betrayed you. He is waiting by the back exit of the moat. That night I began to train. I did pirouettes on the dirty floor. I stretched my numb muscles, ignoring the scream of my ribs. I chewed that dear Gustain fish I had previously thrown away, because I needed strength. Strength to kill. Strength to survive. Strength to take her from this cage. Every second I thought of her, I imagined her standing by the narrow window of her tower, looking at the stars, knowing that I am coming. It was madness. There were two of us, an old monk and a broken knight, against an entire garrison. But behind us was a truth that people like Thomas did not understand. The truth of love that knows no fear before the block. I remember the night before the execution. I did not sleep. I sat in the corner of the cell, clenching that dried rose in my fist, and my body was taut like a bowstring. I felt something ancient, beastly awakening within me. That which my father tried to beat out of me in childhood. That which I tried to hide under knightly manners. It was pure primal rage. Brother Lawrence brought me a long dagger, hidden under his robe. The metal was cold, but it warmed my hand. Tomorrow at dawn, when the guard changes, Tom will come to your door, he said. Be ready. I was ready. I had never been so ready for battle as in that morning. It was not a tournament for golden spurs. It was a battle for the right to breathe the same air as the woman who became my god. And if for this I have to drive this dagger into the throat of everyone who stands in my way, I will do it without a single doubt. Pain and hope merged into one brief moment when the lock of my cell finally clicked. The darkness began to retreat. Ahead was only fire and blood, but I knew, somewhere there, beyond these thick walls, the amber of her eyes still shines for me. And that was the only thing that mattered. The dawn of that day was red, as if someone had spilled wine across the white canvas of the sky. When the lock of my door clicked, I was not waiting for angels. I was waiting for death, but Tom came instead. My faithful squire looked pale. His hands trembled as he handed me my old, nicked dagger. We did not exchange a single word. In the dungeons of Helmsley, the walls have ears longer than human tongues. We crept through dark corridors that smelled of mold and centuries of human despair. I moved like a ghost, though my ribs screamed with every step. When we met the first guard by the spiral staircase, I did not hesitate. In my soul, there was no more room for the knightly code. I simply drove the blade under his chin, muffling his mouth so the sound of his last breath would not wake the castle. It was dirty. It was vulgar, but it was the only way to reach her. The North Tower seemed endless. Steps. I counted ache one, because the ache one was a step toward my paradise, or my scaffold. When I broke open the door of her room, I saw Eleanor. She stood by the window, dressed in the same simple dress in which I had seen her last in the chapel. She did not scream. She simply turned around, and in her amber eyes, I saw such strength that my heart, which I thought was broken, grew back together again. I knew, she whispered, and that sound was dearer than all the trumpets of the king's army. But then came the very twist I did not expect. When we had almost reached the inner courtyard, Lord Thomas rose before us. He was not alone. With him were 4 guardsmen, and beside him, with a vile smile, stood Gilbert. I prepared for the last fight. I gripped my dagger tighter, ready to die protecting her back. But Thomas did not give the order to attack. He looked strangely calm, or rather hollow. "Do you think, Alistair, that you are the only one who knows what pain is?" he asked. His voice was hollow, as if he spoke from a grave. It turned out that while I rotted in prison, Eleanor's brother, that same lord who sold her to Thomas, had raised a rebellion against the king. Thomas was accused of links with the rebels. His titles, his lands, his gold, all of it was confiscated by the crown only yesterday evening. He was as much a shadow as I was. Gilbert, that snake, had already prepared the papers for his arrest. Thomas looked at Eleanor long heavily. Perhaps, deep inside his fat, corrupted heart, something resembling a human feeling still flickered. "Take her," he said, stepping into the shadows. "Go, before Gilbert calls the royal marshals. In this world, there is no more Lord Clifford. There is only a heap of stones that will soon crumble." It was not a battle. It was a humiliating pardon from a man I hated. We ran through the secret exit, through the moat, where the water stank of rotting grass, to the very river where Tom was already holding 2 horses. We did not look back. We rode all night until Helmsley Castle became a tiny speck on the horizon. We found our refuge on the very border with Wales. It was a land where no one asked your name. If you had strong hands to hold an axe and eyes that did not fear work. I burned my knightly belt on the very first night in the forest. I forged from the remains of my broken sword 2 sickles, one for myself, the other for anyone who wanted to help us. Years have passed since that night. My hands are now covered not with scars from battles, but with calluses from the earth. I am no longer Sir Alistair. I am just Alan the miller, whom the neighbors respect for an honest weight and for the fact that I always have a good word for a tired traveler. My face is covered in wrinkles like an old map, and my hair has become white as the mist over the river Usk. Eleanor, my Eleanor, still smells of lavender. She no longer wears silk. Her dresses are of rough linen, and her hands smell of freshly baked bread. When I look at her in the evenings, when she sits by the fireplace and mends the shirts of our sons, I understand that this is true greatness. We have 3 children. Edward became a shepherd. He loves these mountains more than any gold. Thomas, yes, we named our youngest son after the one who let us go, because forgiveness is also strength, helps me at the mill. And our daughter, little Rosa, has the same amber eyes as her mother. Recently I learned of an unexpected final to our old story. Tom, my former squire, who sometimes sends us news, told me that Lord Thomas did not die on the block. He went into a monastery and became a simple gardener. A man who held an entire county in fear now prunes rose bushes. The world is a strange place. It affords us all, if we give it a chance. I am finishing this record because the sun is already setting behind the hills. My grandchildren run around the yard, and their laughter is the best music I have ever heard. I regret nothing, neither the filth of the prison, nor the broken sword, nor the lost honor. For the honor of a knight is an empty sound if there is no love for one single woman. I place these parchments in a box and bury them under the wall of our little farm. Perhaps in 600 years, someone will find them and understand. In the darkest times, among blood and injustice, the only thing that matters is the hand you hold in yours, when the world around you is crumbling. Love desperately, live simply, and never be afraid to change golden spurs for the warmth of a human heart. The world ends not when kings disappear, but when the last fire of hope dies out in the heart. I am going to her. She is already calling me for supper, and that voice, it is all I need to be happy in this life and the next.